NHS Staff Voices. Oh, okay, robotic voice is done. This meeting is hosted by NHS Staff Voices, who work with Keep Our NHS Public, and it's meeting on the amazing sort of wave of strikes that we're seeing happening across the NHS at the moment, and how people can best show solidarity with that, and also, you know, an opportunity for us to get together and talk about that as NHS workers, and talk about how we can win. So there's an amazing sort of set of speakers lined up. I'll tell you a bit about me. My name's Ellie Badcock. I'm an occupational therapist in the NHS and a Unison steward as well. Unfortunately, from my own perspective, obviously Unison didn't reach the threshold in a lot of trusts, but we did in the London Ambulance Service, which is incredible. And in a lot of places, including in my trust, we boosted the turnout from something like 11% the last time there was a ballot in the NHS to over 25%, which, you know, is quite a feat in itself, really. As we know, a lot of NHS trusts have bought into this privatisation model. So that means that some trusts have got people across huge geographical areas and in, you know, dozens of different services, which can be challenging. But Unison will, you know, within Unison will be pushing for balloting during the next pay review as well, which is only in March now. And we know that our amazing colleagues in the ambulance service, in nursing and physiotherapy, absolutely leading the way for us, which is incredible. And there's been huge coordination between unions on the ground. And that's why meetings like this are important, to keep workers in different sectors united, but show the sort of people at the top of the unions as well, the strength and the depth of feeling on this sort of issue. So I'll introduce each person as we speak. If we've got time at the end, we might be able to take a couple of questions. And each speaker will speak for about 4 or 5 minutes. So if we're ready to get stuck in, then if we could go first to Joyce. Joyce Stevenson has been a BT 999 operator for 44 years. She's a CWU national rep and took industrial action for the very first time earlier this year. So congratulations, Joyce, and please go on.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you for inviting me to speak to everyone this evening. It is a great honour, and the first thing that I have to say is I'm not involved in the NHS in any way, and really what I want to speak to you about tonight is what you're going to experience as you start to take industrial action. And to give you some context, I worked for BT, as Ellie has said, 44 years. We've never been involved in any industrial action. But this year, the company decided to give us a pay imposition of £1,500, which, you know, after 3 years of not getting any pay rises during the pandemic and the year before it was just seen as a pay cut. So the CWU balloted the members, and in 2 of the groups, BT Openreach and BT Group, they met the threshold, but unfortunately in EE, we didn't meet the threshold and we missed it by something like 6 votes, six votes, that's all it was. So the CWU then notified BT of 4 strike dates and entered into what they called a life and limb agreement with the company, where the people who worked in the 999 service would be exempt from taking any strike action. But all that happened there was the company decided that that was fine. They allowed people to work from home. You know, colleagues went out in industrial action. We carried on working and everything just carried on as normal. So after those 4 days, the union felt they were left with no other option but to withdraw from the life and limb agreement. And the 999 operators, along with certain other members of staff, were advised that we would be taking industrial action with everybody else. So the first thing that we met with was obviously, well, what are you going to do if somebody needs an emergency service? How will you feel if they can't get an ambulance? How are you going to feel if they can't get through to the police? What happens if their house burns down? You know, just all this stuff. And this is where it's going to be so important that you have to put it back onto the employer. It's the employer's responsibility. They've chosen to not negotiate, not respect you, not give you, not pay you what you're worth. And so therefore you've been left with no other option but to take some form of action, be it industrial action, be it on strike. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that you're going to meet. And you know, we had to continually say, we are disappointed that we're having to take industrial action, but the employer has left us with no other option. And that's it. You've got to keep putting it back onto the employer. We've got a lot of low paid people who work in BT, who work in the 999 service. We're one of the lowest paid grades within the company, you know, so a lot of our people and our members were only getting paid £21,500 a year for working 37.5 hours, you know, so it's for them as much as everybody else. We can't retain staff. I know it's a big problem within the NHS, you know, and until you start paying people what they're worth, you're never going to retain anyone. It drives me mad when people say, you know, you shouldn't be taking industrial action. It's a vocation. I'm sorry, it's not a vocation, it's a job. It's a job that needs to pay me. A vocation does not pay my bills, you know, and that's something else that they think by, you know, giving you claps, pats in the back, or telling you it's a vocation, that you're going to accept either a very low pay offer and one that actually sees you getting a pay reduction rather than a pay increase. You know, the public are behind you. You know, we stand shoulder to shoulder with you, you know, and your fight is our fight, you know, and we're not going to leave you with no support. We're going to support you all the way. But I have to say, you're going to have to be hard. You're the only people that can fight for a proper pay rise, you know, and with our help and our support, you know, and the public behind you, beside you, you know, you will see it. You'll do it. You'll achieve it. Just the same way as us taking industrial action, BT came back to the table and they've come out with a revised offer, which we are now balloting our members. And I have to say, for the low paid grades within the company, it's worth somewhere between 12 and 15%, which, considering that they wouldn't even talk to us before we took any action, shows you what solidarity, standing together and, you know, being hard and taking action can achieve. And I wish you all the success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. It's always weird when you can't hear people clapping, but I assure you everyone's clapping on their cameras and giving the thumbs up. So next, I will come to Stacey Richardson, who is a ward sister and a member of the Royal College of Nursing. So thank you so much, Stacey.
Hi, yeah, it's lovely to be here tonight. Obviously, I'm a sister in the northeast of England. It's on a paediatric surgical ward. At the moment, across adult and paediatric services, it's probably the worst it's been. Far, far worse than COVID times. I mean, if COVID seems to be a thing of the past now, when we've got all these issues with Strep A, as well as just social issues, mental health's on a all-time high. So industrial action is obviously something none of us have took lightly. It's something that it's been a bit of an avoidance. To be honest with you, I didn't really believe in nurses striking ever until this point. And I can't see any other way out of this. I can't see there's no other statement we can really make. The government can see quite clearly just how bad things are. Unfortunately, I feel like with a lot of nurses, I mean, I'm sure I speak for many different specialties, with a lot of nurses, there's still a lot of issues around feeling that guilt. There's still that guilt, sometimes from management positions in the hospital, that they shouldn't be striking. You know, it's all about the patients are going to suffer, which obviously isn't the case. There's actually a contingency plan, which makes the wards safer than they are day to day anyway. But they feel this guilt that they can't do that, even though at the moment it's just for 2 days. Some of these nurses are only working 1 out of the 2 days to start with. There was a young nurse at the start of her career who voted to strike, and now she's actually said she's going to work. And it's all to do with attitudes. And it's awful. And I said to her, you know what? It's about nurses are using food banks. There's that. But on top of everything else, it's about the patients as well. We're in absolute dire straits. Patients who have falls, little grandmas and granddads, are lying on the hard floor of the homes for 8-9 hours. They're finally getting an A&E. They're lying in their own body fluids in a corridor full of drunk people. They're getting pneumonia and they never make it out of hospital. And that is not to do with any of the staff not caring for them. That is to do with the working conditions, as well as the conditions the patients are being treated in. It's lack of resources, it's lack of staff, it's lack of pay. People are going to Aldi, which is, you know, Aldi's great, but nurses with these skills, physiotherapists with these skills, across the board, people are going to work in Aldi because it's less stressful, and actually they're coming out with more money at the end of it. So I can't feel any more passionately really about this strike action. I'm actually looking forward to it. I really am looking forward to it. It's just unfortunate that there's still this stigma of guilt going on. I think that's the thing I've really noticed, and I'm quite upset by. In my place of work, I'm one of few. I'm single figures in my particular working area of people who are going to have strike action that day. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Stacey, and thanks for sharing your feelings on that as well. And I think it's difficult for people, you know, all across the NHS, and I think knowing that there are people in this meeting who've got your back, I hope that helps, and helps you kind of feel the strength of your convictions,
Absolutely.
which you're absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. So next up we'll go to Simon Day, who is a paramedic and the West Midlands GMB Ambulance Branch Secretary.
Lovely, thank you. It's a real honour and privilege, as everybody said, to be here talking to you guys on this platform. Yeah, so I'm a paramedic, also known as an ambulance driver. Will always make us smile for any ambulance workers out there. Yeah, why are we striking? Well, 10,000 GMB ambulance worker members voted unanimously almost for strike action, and we're striking in 9 out of the 10 ambulance trusts across the UK and Wales. The context we're striking in, I'm sure you've heard, as the other guys have described. I had a little look at our details this morning, and at 7:30 we had nearly 400 outstanding calls. That's 400 calls either for ambulances or for clinical advice that couldn't be answered at that time, 7:30 in the morning. Multiple ambulances waiting outside A&E departments across the region. Some of those ambulances waiting in excess of 12 hours just today. That's the context. We're not striking yet. There's been no strike yet from the ambulance service. That's the context in which we find ourselves. And every single one of our ambulance workers who were balloted were balloted over pay. That was the reason they were balloted. But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, every single one of them voted because of the issues we're facing day in, day out. When we turn up to a hospital with a patient, we can't offload. When a patient has to stay on the back of a vehicle for 12, 16, 28 hours in some cases. And when we constantly get calls over our radios to say there are category 1 patients in the community that we haven't got an ambulance to send to. Those situations are the reasons this time we've got a mandate to strike from our members. One that we didn't have last time on the Pay 15 campaign, but the dire straits that we find our NHS in has led to ambulance workers taking action and voting. And like you'll hear, none of them want to. None of them take that vote lightly because they all care for their patients, as you'll hear time and again when NHS staff, whatever their discipline, whatever area they come from, will tell you. But I want to take this opportunity, I suppose, just to tell you how you can be involved with those strikes, because I think it's really important that, you know, we have a load of nurses striking, we have ambulance workers striking, we have other NHS and hospital staff striking, but it's not enough. It's not enough to bring change. We need everybody in the country to make a stand and stand up for our NHS. We need to change the status quo. The status quo with this government seems to be that if they can make it fail, they can bring privatisation in by the back door, hip and knees privatised. You know, what's next? Ambulance journeys, and what's after that? Other operations, nursing staff. It's all going to be by the back door. They can make a profit from it, and they're not interested in keeping it safe, keeping it free, and keeping it free at the point of access for all people. That's the beauty of the NHS that we stand on, and we need to stand together to defend it. So just very quickly, 3 ways that you guys can help. Write to your MP, urge your MP to put pressure on the government to talk to the unions, to listen to the unions, to come to a realisation that pay matters. Pay matters not just for retaining staff, but for recruiting staff. And if we haven't got staff, we won't have an NHS. That's the bottom line. Take every opportunity you can to call the government out on their propaganda. You've heard Barclay on the news, you've heard Hunt on the news, and all the other ministers who come in and say, well, we've got the independent PRB, and they make the decisions. And people don't understand, the general public does not understand that the PRB are given a budget by government, and only within the restraints of that budget can they then make a pay award. And the government haven't always agreed with what they've said, but now they want us to do. Get it out on social media, get it out at your branch meetings, get it out in any media opportunities you have. Help people understand that it's a political choice and not the recommendation of the PRB. And finally, we've got protests in the ambulance service on the 21st and the 28th. Get involved with the social media campaigns, join the protests, find out where they are near you. I'm sure they'll be advertised across Facebook and social media. I'm sure people will be glad for you to turn up and give your support. Let's stand together and let's protect our NHS. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. That's absolutely fantastic. We have next a speaker from the UCU, University and Colleges Union, who have had some fantastic strike action recently. So we have Christina Payne, who is an activist, socialist, and chair of London Met UCU and a lecturer in music. Christina, I know you're having some audio issues earlier, but I'm hoping those were resolved if you're here.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, brilliant.
Okay, so hi, I'm Christina. I work at London Met University as a lecturer, and I'm chair of the UCU branch. Just want to say, first of all, absolute solidarity to you guys, because it just what you've been saying has brought me to tears. It really has. It's just so important what you're doing. And I would say, as you know, we as lecturers, we've just had 2 weeks of strike action, and for many of us, It was the first time people were taking action for all the reasons that you're talking about. We're at breaking point. And if you think about it, we kind of teach a lot of the generation of new nurses and new doctors as well. So there's a kind of link between us. But the real point is that there's a link between all of the people in this country who can't survive on this cost of living crisis and the way that our pay has gone down over so many years. So in UCU, for example, we have a third of lecturers on the equivalent of 0 hours contracts. And this is, and you know, people see lecturers as really privileged and all of those kind of things, but actually many of the conditions we're working under are appalling. People sleeping in cars, people can't even shop in Aldi, people leaving to go and work in, you know, Sainsbury's or the equivalent, because they simply can't survive. And we've had a 25% inflation pay decrease. We were offered 3% by employers last year, and we've had strike action over the last 4 years, and it was only this year, it's only in the last strike we've had that we actually now have them coming to the table, we think. And I think what was important about the strike we've just had is that it was historic, because we had an aggregated ballot. Basically all 550 universities, 70,000 staff all went on strike together, and it was just the solidarity between people was amazing. But I would say to you, like I'm hearing tonight, people are feeling like a little bit scared, a little bit not sure, and that's exactly how we were 2 weeks ago. But since we took the strike action and actually did it, all these new members came forward, our branches grew, and people grew in confidence. And I think that's one really important thing I'd like to say to you, is that it might seem a bit scary now, but just take the action and go for it, because you're on the right side. You really are doing the right thing. And you know, for a lot of us lecturers, we chose to work in education for similar reasons to you. We really care about education, we care about our students, and we've suffered the same level of guilt. We get guilt trips all the time for leaving our students, for them missing their assessments, you know, they're not going to get their degree, all this rubbish. And actually it's due to the employers. The employers have a choice, and that we're the adult in the room. We're the ones that offer the solutions. The employers just don't offer anything. So we've got people on 0 hours contracts, we've got a pay, in effect, a pay decrease of 25%. We've got pensions down by 35%, and we've got workload, just like you guys, people working 70-hour weeks, easy, and people, and there are people who actually have committed suicide because of the workload issues, and also people in various states of mental health distress because of they don't know when they're going to work because they're on kind of 0 hours contracts. So I think what I would say to you guys is, we really want to be with you. We want to be on the picket line with you. We want to support you in any way we can. So just let us know what we can do. The whole of UCU would love to support you, because we realise how important, you know, this is. And I think the really important thing is that, you know, all the unions are coming out now, because there's nothing else we can do. Well, a lot of us feel like we kind of weren't sure whether we wanted to take strike, whether we could take strike action, but we've been left with no choice. And I think that's the thing I've really learned from listening to you lot tonight. And I would say one way in which we kind of link together another way is actually the attacks on staff are attacks on our students, which means it's attacks on everyone, because our working conditions are the students' learning conditions. So, but I know we're not quite as important as you guys, but the same things apply actually, in the same way that we've been guilt tripped and made to feel we shouldn't take action and we can't do this. It has been the same. But I would say to you, we've done it, and we're going into now January, and the employers have actually decided to talk to us, which is one thing. But we've still got strike action planned. We've got marketing boycotts planned, because you can't stop. You can't let them tell you that stuff. And I would say that's one bit of advice, if I can give you, is to keep on going with the strike action until you get something that's credible, that you can really, your members can really get behind, because otherwise you just get taken down the garden path. So I think that's all I wanted to say really, but I just really wanted to say, you know, we're really behind you, and let us know anything we can do. And I think the other thing, just one more thing, we had a march in central London last Wednesday, and we marched through the whole of central London. This galvanised so many people who'd never been on strike before, and we just marched through central London. So I think maybe having a big NHS march again would be amazing, or something like that. I'm sure you're going to do that, you guys, but we're with you all the way. Thank you.
Yes, amazing suggestion, thank you. And thank you so much for your solidarity. I think, you know, all workers, whether we're public sector, private sector, NHS education, whatever, you know, we're all key workers. Absolutely. We're all vital to keeping the country running. So thank you so much for your support there. We will move on now to Alia Butt, who is an NHS psychotherapist and who is also the chair of NHS Staff Voices, and who's been integral to putting meetings like this on. So thank you, Alia, and go ahead.
Thanks, Ellie. And it's been really great to hear everyone speak. So thanks everyone for joining. So I've worked in the NHS for about 12 years, and it was only really over the pandemic that I became quite active, just because I really felt like I had to. And I think that's one thing that we all kind of have in common here. One thing I noticed over the pandemic was that public support for workers often depends on the messaging pushed out by the government and the media. But I think things are really beginning to change. And I think that's because, well, one reason is because people's conditions of living have changed so dramatically. Government policy over the years has severely compromised the standard of living in this country. Ironically, the government love to blame those most vulnerable, arguably those whose lives have been made more difficult by their policy that puts emphasis on prioritisation and austerity cuts across the board that are not as necessary as they make out. They've tried for a long time, in my opinion, to weaken workers by allowing companies and services to rake in huge profits while suppressing wages. And that has resulted in the cost of living crisis, which has made things more difficult for those least able to make ends meet. You know, it's a pretty unethical and cruel government, I would say, and we're going to have to keep struggling until we come out strongly enough against them. We have to keep pushing back. Ultimately, they're not going to stop until the power is taken from them. Unfortunately, however, I think when it comes to the NHS, the Labour Party are not really promising anything particularly comforting for workers or patients either. I think we've got a shadow health minister who's talking about taking on hostile health unions and plans to save the NHS through more privatisation. You know, when we're very horrendously aware that the amount of damage that private tendering and that kind of way of organising the NHS has inflicted on our health service and staff and patients. I think in the media we're beginning to hear the idea that people are going to suffer due to strikes, and we all know that people are already suffering, and there are a lot of staff who are already redeployed. And as Stacey said, there is a contingency plan, so we have to bear in mind that that is not actually going to necessarily be the case. I think we're also hearing the idea that migrants are the enemy, they're responsible for these huge backlogs, the overflowing waiting list. It's clear that they have often the least power in society, the least jurisdiction to make things better than they are, while at the same time, many workers who prop up the NHS are from overseas. It's the government that makes these choices. It's the government that has its priorities wrong and has the power, not the most vulnerable in society, whether it's migrants, whether it's people who can't get up in the morning and have to be signed off sick, or whether it's, in the same vein, people who are now refusing to go to work on certain days in a crumbling system, because it's dangerous for both staff and patients. And people, I think the general public are really recognising that workers have been pushed to the point where withholding labour is the only bargaining tool that we have at our disposal. And, as others have said, it's not chosen lightly. It genuinely is a last resort, even though, we should be able to strike, even if we don't have to, desperately, so that we can have decent living. But that's not what's happening here. People are going on strike because they have no choice at all. So despite, Rishi Sunak's divisive attempts, we're hearing about him talking about, or basically posing striking workers as the enemy of the public. Despite that, I think the public are continuing to show a lot of support for striking workers. Interestingly, more support than I've ever seen or heard in both the polls or anecdotally. There's a huge, this huge wave of industrial action, I think, speaks huge volumes. I think we're in a time of immense change. What that's going to look like, we don't really know. But I think the more people willing to take action, it's so great. We've got so many excellent people here talking about that. And the more people we have willing to take action, the more chance that the majority of society can see better days, can see better working conditions, living conditions. I think we're fighting a huge machine, but the more and more people are prepared to do that, the more people are prepared to do that, the more success we are bound to have. And I think we've really got to hold on to that. whenever I hear about different people coming out and striking, sometimes, you know, it's quite bizarre for my little head. You know, I'm 36 years old, but I feel like I'm watching a film of a time that's long gone, where people were more ready to act in the interest of their own, you know, living conditions, you know, and that doesn't happen anymore, but it's happening. You know, we're living in a really, I think, painful yet incredible time. We've just heard that physiotherapists working in the NHS, in community services, in GP practices across England and Wales, and that's like 112 organisations, I might be wrong about that, in England have voted to strike. So I think, you know, it's all up for grabs, really, and our solidarity with each other is more important, I would argue, than ever before, in my lifetime anyway. So I'll end by saying huge solidarity with everyone striking, and huge solidarity with everyone who's coming out and encouraging other unions and other industries and other people to strike as well. Solidarity, everyone.
Thanks, Alia. That's fantastic. And I think just the kind of breadth of people from different unions that we have at this meeting, you know, from across the NHS and other industries is amazing. Seeing that level of solidarity, just like openly in the media between workers and trade unionists is incredible. So we'll move on to Daniel Zahedi, who is the co-chair of East England Junior Doctors at the BMA. So go ahead, Daniel. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome everyone. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for joining this important event. I hope your homes aren't too chilly. So my name's Dan, and as Ellie said, I'm a junior doctor up in Cambridge and the BMA's co-chair for the East of England Junior Doctors Committee. Now, junior doctors' pay has plummeted, with a loss of over 26% in the last 14 years in real terms. And you may have seen on the news back in July that the NHS got a 4% pay rise. But what few people did know was that this excluded junior doctors, who were limited to a mere 2%. And that's 2% when the rate for inflation is at over 12%, meaning that a tenth of our salary is being cut just this year again. And after all these years of studying, amassing £100,000 of debt, and my pay is £14 an hour, so at least there's not much to cut. But here we are, an NHS on its knees, 11,000 vacancies for doctors, 46,000 for nurses and counting. And the NHS is, as others have mentioned, they're desperately trying to recruit from overseas in an attempt to plug the gap. We rightly criticise the current World Cup hosts for their exploitation and their reliance on overseas migrant workers, but the very same thing is happening in our backyard. We're working longer and longer in unsafe conditions with improper equipment as they continue to exploit our goodwill so we can ensure that patients are kept safe. Burnouts at an all-time high and patient safety at an all-time low. A&E waiting times have never been this dire. I regularly see patients in critical condition who've been waiting 15 hours or more to be seen, people with heart attacks, people with strokes, being told they have to wait over a day for an ambulance to get to them, missing that time critical window where treatment might have been effective. It's beyond scandalous, and it's a political choice. We spend a significantly lower proportion of our GDP on healthcare compared to companies like France, Germany, or the US. Not that we should ever compare our health service to the US, but when patients are dying unnecessarily, when nurses are quitting a job that they once loved to deliver packages for Amazon, it's time we tell this government loud and clear that enough is enough. And it's all about priorities. It shows the utmost contempt that these people have for their supposedly essential workers, as well as our patients, as well as our NHS and society's most vulnerable, both now and for future days to come. So instead of giving their mates these billions of pounds worth of shady VIP lane contracts, blowing 28 billion on a failed test and trace system with money that's going to be paid for generations to come. And now they're deciding to inflict austerity 2.0 on working people while energy producers are making record profits. They could avoid this all. They could save this sinking ship. But the thing that unites us all is this damning effect that austerity has had over the last decade, which has driven down wages, defunded hospitals, schools, and public services while enriching the few and causing inequality to entrench our society. So we're up against the same beast. We're up against a government who has outwardly boasted about whose interest they're acting for, they were cutting bankers' bonuses rather. They were slashing corporation tax. It was only after tanking the economy and hemorrhaging Tory support that they supposedly get it. But you don't get it, but you will. You'll get that it's us who are the backbone of the country. You'll get that it's us who are driving your ambulances, sweeping your roads, stocking your shelves, nursing you into good health. We pick you up when you're down, with the driving force of trade, with the security, with the prosperity of this country. But as they urged the public to step outside their doors and clap for us, they were cutting our pay at the very same time. Their contempt for workers of this country has gone on too far, and now we're realizing who's in control. So we had the Shadow Minister of Health, as was previously mentioned. He was talking about how there's a militant union. He was actually directed at the BMA. They have announced that they're going to increase medical school and nursing places, which we do welcome. It's the retention that is the issue. And when you're cutting people's pay by over a quarter, when people are leaving in droves to Australia, New Zealand, and or quitting the NHS, when staffing levels are at ridiculously low levels, these are the things that demoralize workers, and these are the things that cause the NHS workers to leave. So you can increase medical student places. You'll get GPs maybe coming in 10 years' time, but it's putting water in a leaking bucket, where if you don't address the problems with retention, and if you're saying that they're saying that we're not going to have reliance on overseas workers, then I don't see what the solution is. It's just a headline. So it's time to stand up. It's time to come together and organise, but we cannot do it alone. Divided we beg, united we win. We cannot submit to the pettiness and grovelling amongst ourselves, or from the billionaire-owned media telling us that we're greedy or we're militant, or the Lynch stole Christmas, turning on our railway workers and nurses to suit their agenda. They want nothing but to divide and conquer. And it's not just about pay, it's about justice. It's about our patients, our school kids, our students, our families, and those who cannot fight for themselves. It's about a happier, it's about a healthier, it's about a fair society. So with whispers of a general strike getting louder and louder by the day, I urge colleagues to come together, from hospital workers, nurses, midwives, physios, pharmacists, porters, domestics, to our posties, our railway workers and bus drivers, our teachers, uni lecturers, firefighters, dock workers, and everyone in between. We have the same goals and the same challenges, but if we come together, if we coordinate together, we will overcome them and we will beat this. Together we all win. So vote to strike and strike to win. I'll see you on the picket line. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. That's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, thank you for highlighting what the junior doctors, and all NHS workers are going through. It really is shameful. I will move on now to, bear with me, Mel Mullings, who is a train driver on the London Underground. She's the RMT local rep on the Bakerloo line, Vice President of the RMT London Transport Regional Council, the Secretary of the RMT Black Solidarity Committee, and the Secretary of the RMT Black and Ethnic Minority Advisory Committee. So exceptionally well qualified to bring solidarity to this meeting, and thank you so much, Mel. Go ahead.
Greetings all, and extended thanks to NHS Voices for allowing me on this platform again. I'm so pleased to be here. When I come up, I know most of us know what our strikes are about, so I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, but it's very on point. I just wanted to go through some basics. We work, we get paid, and our wages should reflect the work that we do. Our wages should also reflect the cost of living, inflation. It should also include rewards, bonuses, deductions if that applies, but also a pension at the end of it. And we have to ask these questions. Is that a demand too far from taxpayers? Is that a demand too far? You know, we should be able to work in conditions that are safe. We should work in workplaces that are free of discrimination, actively promote anti-racism and equality. Staff retention, you've heard it. I think we've all just come up with understanding as grassroots trade unionists and socialists. We've understood that we're on code. You know, staff retention is absolute key. It's an issue. You know, have you ever encountered a member of staff who is fairly new and they're unsure about rules or policies or best practice in safety critical environments? You know, what would that lead to if every single person that is on a job doesn't know what the hell they're doing, right? Because we're forced into situations where we're going into these minimum numbers or minimum staff requirement. You know, last week we had the week before last, sorry, we had an R&T strike with the station requirements team, members of staff, and they removed their labor because they're being cut, you know, to almost nothing. They're being ground down. And they decided in their infinite wisdom to put in 22 what we call ambassadors. Now, instead of coming to the negotiating table and negotiating meaningfully, they put in 22 members of staff who didn't have a clue what they were doing, right? And all that overtime that they paid and all of that confusion, et cetera, you know, caused an absolute uproar. You know, and we've seen it play out disgracefully with P&O, you know, quickly relying on working class to do what we've done for decades, you know, fight each other, but not anymore. We will no longer fight each other anymore. We're coming together. So let's examine those minimum service numbers rules, bring in people who can actively break our strikes, etc., in even safety critical environments, what that impact will be. Let's talk about industries where privatization means inequality. You know, who can pay can live. You know, that's what will happen if our NHS is taken away from us. You know, it's happened on the buses, it's happened on the trains, where privatization has brought in two-tier working systems, two-tier pay systems, terms and conditions. It's been eroded, the morale gets eroded. All of a sudden, your normal staffing hours can't pay your bills. You're now forced to doing overtime to pay your bills. And when public services go into privatization, they become unregulated. You know, we'll have a situation where more people will die. You know, people will be more employed under contracts that are draconian in nature. You know, modern enslavement comes to mind. You know, discriminatory, you know, longer hours, less terms and conditions, and that's not suitable, you know, for us as trade unionists and us to going forward in society. Let's talk about the right thing for us to do. And if our companies refuse to come to negotiating tables with respect and any form of deal that we can actually go forward with that is satisfactory to our members, we must remove our labor. We must continue to do this until our companies relent. We have to do it. It is our responsibility, not only to ourselves, our retired members, to our members who are going to be managed out of our workplaces, yeah, to our future generations who will have nothing in terms of job security, fair pay and good terms and conditions, safe environments and discrimination. We're talking about also our comrades who come from abroad and will be exploited. We must remain strong. It needs to go even further for us to understand what is at stake in our particular areas of expertise. Let's be those experts and continue to speak to our members, speak to our comrades in our unions and speak to the press, you know, but please understand how to speak to the press. We can't go, you know, grandstanding and go, you know, into the press thinking that they're our friends. Not every single one of these press outlets are our friends. You know, we had that situation where, you know, strikes were stopped because of the passing of the monarch and what that brought about. And I'm not being disrespectful. I'm saying let's be meaningful in when we are going ahead to gain public support. What does that actually mean? Let's make sure we're bringing our global movement together. And we're all recognising that our comrades here from abroad, here from here, all of us working together in solidarity. Please support our strikes. We've got strikes coming up, and I know that sometimes with the RMT it's a bit confusing. We are an all grades union. I think it's really important that any of the other unions need to recognise that we also need to remember that there are other grades that work in conjunction within our industries. We need to pull all of those comrades together and make our union stronger. You know, just as Daniel says, stronger, we are stronger together. We have to make sure any of our movements that we're doing must include anti-racism and equality. It must be something that pulls us together. Otherwise, the government will just sit back and watch us fight each other, right? So solidarity to all, and remember to keep strong and keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel. And I mean, you can see by how many people are clapping here that what you say has such an impact. And thank you for that solidarity. That's fantastic. The final person that will speak today is Holly Johnston, who is an oncology nurse and a union rep, and belongs to the campaign group NHS Workers Say No. So thank you, Holly. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ellie. So yeah, first of all, I'd like to express solidarity from the campaign group NHS Workers Say No to all workers currently in dispute, to all of you in struggle. You all inspiring confidence in us all, and we stand with you and simply cannot accept these attacks on our pay, our terms and conditions, and to the working class. So as we are fighting for renationalisation in the NHS, to kick the privateers and the profiteers out of the NHS, we also support the calls to renationalise the railways, energy and Royal Mail, and we need to see all workers brought back in-house. So I've been a nurse for 18 years. I'm usually a sister in oncology in Sheffield. And what we are seeing in cancer care is the impact of millions on waiting lists, delays in investigations, diagnosis and treatments, and no beds in the specialist areas and wards for the patients, and then no staff to give the quality care that they all deserve. So across every corner of the health service, we are in the midst of a recruitment and retention crisis, with skilled and experienced staff leaving in droves. With a reported 40,000 nurses alone leaving the NHS in the past year. So, you know, how can we be expected to retain staff when our pay has been deliberately eroded by this government for over a decade, seeing over a 20% loss in real terms in our wages? And we know the money is there. We know the whole of the UK needs a pay rise as well. And we know the cost of living crisis is impacting on the health of our nation. So staff are witnessing firsthand a catastrophic breakdown of services, which has left us with 135,000 vacancies, and our patients are in danger. So we need to recruit, but we also need to retain staff, as without addressing that, we have no chance of tackling the backlog of 7 million patients on waiting lists. Sadly, neither the government or the opposition ever bring retention into the conversation, because that would mean putting pay restoration on the agenda, which they refuse to do. So we are in a crisis, and one which has been years in the making. What we are witnessing unfold is certainly no accident. It's been deliberately designed and implemented by successive governments who are hell-bent on reducing state expenditure on health, while health inequalities and the gap between the rich and the poor increase. A report by the Health Foundation revealed that the UK has spent around 20% less per person on health each year than similar European countries over the past decade. The data shows that we would have had to invest 40 billion every year for the last decade to have similar outcomes in to other European countries. And we have a group of workers who work hours of overtime every week for free, skipping their breaks due to pressure within services, and are now being forced to use food banks, sleep in their cars, as they cannot afford fuel to and from work. selling back annual leave to make ends meet, and then ultimately quitting because the moral injury of delivering substandard care on unfair wages is simply not sustainable. So we are essential workers, and like representatives from other sectors on this call, we have kept this country running. So we have had 12.5 years of this government, and we are tired of hearing questions on how we're going to fix this mess. Let's be clear, this mess is their mess, and they continue to leave the most vulnerable to suffer despite warnings and calls from the NHS and its staff and others. And the NHS has a deficit of 35 billion a year, and it requires continued funding which meets the rise in inflation to ensure that we have a health system which is free to all, with a workforce which is well resourced and staffed to meet the needs of society. We hear a lot from this government about growth, but if they are serious about this, then they should be investing in the NHS as it would give a return. Having people unable to work due to long-term sickness is no good, and this is what we are seeing with the waiting lists. And running the NHS with all its vacancies is expensive too, with trusts paying incredible amounts to private agencies to cover shifts, with total spending on agency staff up by 20% last year to £3 billion. So investing in our NHS, starting with a decent pay rise to recruit and retain staff, is the right thing to do to safeguard care and keep services in-house. Now, our unions have accepted to negotiate with the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, but have been met with silence around discussing our pay. So they only have themselves to blame as we gear up for strikes across the NHS this winter. We are dedicated to our work, we care deeply about the patients, and we absolutely see striking as our last resort. So we have nurses and support workers going out on strike on with the ambulance staff in Unison, Unite and GMB, call handlers, and just announced today we now have visits across the UK and MIVs in Wales that have mandate action as well. So it's absolutely continue to keep up the work of getting organised. The ballot results in the unions, but we still have some way to go in some areas of the NHS. So I'd say let's keep the pressure on our unions to make sure they are fighting unions, represent what their members want. And the next round of submissions to the review body start again in January. So we need to keep going, be ready for next year as well, so we can hit mates in more areas of the NHS. And we'll potentially see the second round of strikes with TN in January, as well as results from ballots of teachers and firefighters and so on. And I think I agree, I think a big NHS march is much needed and overdue. We've seen how powerful the UCU march was, and the 20,000 members of the CWU march in London last week. So I'd agree with the previous speaker that we really do need a mass demonstration for the NHS. I'd say become a rep if you're not already one, become active in your union, get involved in the union campaigns, and get involved in campaigns such as NHS Workers Say No, NHS Staff Voices, and Keep Our NHS Public. And it's absolutely vital that we stick together, that cross-union, cross-sector, working class solidarity is our strength, and we can push for unions to coordinate, and in my opinion, build for a general strike to force these Tories out altogether. And we're seeing attacks across the public sector and all sectors. So support each other's picket lines, be there on the 15th, on the 20th for RCN, and the 21st and 28th for Unison and GMB and Unite. And NHS Workers Say No will be holding action in several places. So we've got Liverpool, Sheffield, Chester and London on the RCN strike days. And I know a lot of trades councils have organised joint rallies on these dates too. So I'll just mention the London Solidarity March. So it's 2:30 PM, meet at University College London Hospital on Euston Road and march to Downing Street. So please attend that if you can. And our message to all striking NHS staff is stay angry, stay focused and stay united. You will be the ones on the right side of history, not this Tory government who are decimating the NHS and costing lives in the process. So solidarity and strength to you all. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Harley. That's fantastic, and I hope that people are able to get to those solidarity marches. If you put them in the chat, I think that'd be really helpful for people who would like to attend, if that's possible. If not, message it to Alia or Lewis and we can pop that in. So we've got time to just take a few kind of questions and contributions from people. We won't have everyone come back or be here all night, but if people have something they'd like to contribute, please raise your hand using the Zoom chat function if you can, and just putting it up on the camera if you can't. Yes, Mel.
Thank you. My question is for my comrades in the NHS. We see that the government is trying to squeeze wages out. They're really, putting our whole society in danger with the amount of people that are waiting for beds. The urgent care is not there, etc., etc. What is this? Is it just the US that they're following into this privatization model, or are there other countries that are, forging ahead with these things? Why is the government so, intent on privatizing our NHS?
Does any of the speakers want to come back on that specifically? I might pick on Alia because you talked quite a bit about privatisation. Oh, Simon, sorry, did you put your hand up? Go on, you go.
Yeah, just a quick one. It's more of an opinion than any fact. I think ideologically this government and their ilk put profit before people, and it's simply an extension of that ideology of profit being more important than any of us. And we saw it during the pandemic with things like we've already mentioned the VIP lanes. It wasn't a plan or a resourcing schedule to make sure that people were safe and make sure people were protected. It was a plan to make profit, and that's all that ideology results in. Profit is everything and people are nothing, and that's what it's built on.
Absolutely, thank you. Does anyone else have a question to ask or a comment? I can see a couple of comments in the chat. Judith Lucas has said we need to come back on the government message that they support hard work. How much harder do they want health staff to work? A very good question indeed. And I'm just seeing there's a couple of marches and local solidarity events that people put in the chat as well. Zoe, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, just wondering if we can get details again of exactly what's happening on the 15th and the 20th, or a link so that we can get that updated locations and times, because I know some people think they can't go because it's a work day, but I know actually maybe if you're starting early and going late, we might be able to get some extra people there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in and answer that. I know that NHS Staff Voices have been putting together a list of how you can show solidarity, which Lewis is going to put a link to in the chat. So that will come from Keep Our NHS Public. Yeah, so list of picket lines and resources to support the strikes is there. And a couple of other people have also put in the chat details of their own local pickets and local protests. So just make sure that you save the chat when you leave the meeting, then you should have access to all of that. Ronald, go ahead.
To address the question about why the government is keen on privatizing the NHS, Unite did a study showing that at least 70 MPs, sitting MPs, have investments in private healthcare firms. And not only that, in the past, and you go back to Patricia Hewitt when she was the Secretary of Health under the Blair government, when she left, she took a job with a private healthcare firm. And that's been basically the trend of healthcare secretaries who then go into private healthcare industry. We call that in the United States cross-fertilization, a very cozy relationship between private and public interests. So that in as quickly as concisely I can put it, is why basically the government is very keen on privatizing the health system.
Thank you. Thanks. That's very helpful indeed. Do other people have any questions or comments? I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well to see if anyone's put anything in there. Oh yes, John, go ahead.
Well, just coming back to Ron's point, when American academics who are arguing for an NHS type system in their own country look at what's been going on in the UK, they're absolutely horrified and appalled. But they had there was a very good article in the BMJ 5 or 6 years ago by Himmelstein and Woolhandler, and they asked that question at the end of the paper. So why is it being done? And their answer was, it's redistribution of wealth from poor to rich. So it's making some people wealthy at the expense of the majority. And I think that's really what Ron was saying, and that's the bottom line. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, yeah, this is not a kind of fringe or like niche view, you know, is it? Yeah, something that's even being reported on in kind of mainstream health journals. I can't see any other hands up. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But I can't see anyone else with their hands up. So I think, you know, we'll close the meeting at this point. And I just want to thank everyone so much for coming on this, and to everyone that is going on strike for the work that you're doing, you know, the emotional work, the physical work that you've been doing in getting the vote out, and doing that. And just to say, you know, I hope you take some sense of solidarity away from this meeting, that, you know, whatever the media say, whatever the government say, there are millions of people who really, really support you. And for people that aren't working in the NHS or going on strike, please do look at the resources that that Lewis has put in the chat and others have put in the chat. Keep Our NHS Public and put a big list of all the, you know, strikes and resources that you can take to picket lines. So please do that. And again, thank you so much for all of your support. And you know, hopefully the next meeting that we have, we all have won our demands, and the NHS will be in a much better position than it was today. So thank you, and take care, and see you all on the picket lines.